see this guy here staring back at you?
Yeah?
That's your toughest opponent. Every time you get into the ring, that's who you're going against. I believe that in boxing, and I do believe that in life. Okay? Now throw a jab in the jaw. All right, one to the gut. Now, every time you punch this guy, what's he doing?
Just throwing one back at me.
That's right. So either you block it, slip it, or get out of the way. So. I'll leave you two alone for a while. Good luck.
There's a battle being fought every single day. Not with the boss who demands too much. Not with the relationship that's grown cold. Not with the bills that won't balance. It's a silent war happening in the space between what's desired and what's allowed. And the most terrifying part? The enemy remains invisible, hidden in plain sight. Maybe it's been felt before. That moment when opportunity knocks, and instead of moving forward, something freezes everything in place. A whisper that says this isn't meant for this person. The timing isn't right. It'll fall apart again. And then comes the retreat. Not because the world blocked the path, but because the sabotage happened before the first step was even taken. And later, alone in the quiet, the question echoes, why does this keep happening? The truth cuts deep, but it needs to be spoken. The greatest opponent isn't out there. Not parents, not the economy, not luck. The bars on the cage were built from the inside. The fear that paralyzes gets fed daily. The same patterns repeat while different results are expected. And until this internal enemy is faced directly, battles that were already won keep getting lost. This video isn't about cheap motivation. It's about the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. If there's a feeling that something internal is doing the sabotaging, that the real obstacle stands between who someone is and who they could become, then subscribe now. Hit the bell, because this channel doesn't speak to the masses. It speaks to those ready to see what hurts. And this needs to be watched until the very end. Some thoughts don't get shared, not with friends, not in therapy. Thoughts that surface at 3 in the morning when the world goes quiet and there's nothing left but that inner voice. That's when it appears, the sensation of self-betrayal, the feeling that somehow, in some way, the saboteur has been internal all along. On the outside, there are smiles, agreements, claims of being fine, but inside, a courtroom operates around the clock. A merciless judge analyzing every decision, every word, every movement, and the verdict stays consistent. Not enough. Undeserving. Bound to ruin everything again. And the worst part? The belief sets in. Not because it's true, but because it's been heard so many times it became the only truth available. The contradiction becomes constant. Wanting things while simultaneously rejecting them. Craving to be seen while hiding. Desiring growth while sabotaging every step, seeking peace while feeding internal chaos like it's the only familiar companion. It's like standing in a room with 2 doors. One leads to freedom, the other back to prison. And the second door keeps getting chosen, not out of malice, but because it's known. Because the fear of the unknown towers over the desire for change. And nobody knows this. Nobody sees the war being waged internally while everything appears controlled on the surface. But it's felt. Every single day, and it exhausts more than any job, any external problem, because fighting the world is one thing. Fighting the self is entirely different, and the battle is being lost. Before anything else, something needs to be understood. Nothing is broken here. This isn't weakness, not a character flaw, not a curse. What's being felt is human. It's the natural consequence of years lived with beliefs that were never originally owned. Programming that taught safety matters more than truth, that control matters more than presence, that self-protection is wiser than risk. Everyone in internal transition experiences this. Every person beginning to awaken from their automated version faces resistance. And where does that resistance come from? From within. Because the part wanting change has to confront the part wanting to stay the same. It's like trying to walk forward while one side of the body pulls backward. The issue isn't contradiction, it's division. When opportunity gets sabotaged, when paralysis hits before a choice is made, when retreat happens before any attempt begins, it's not cowardice. It's an old internal structure trying to maintain safety. And to that structure, safety means don't change, don't risk, don't leave the known. even when the known is a prison, even when the known suffocates, because the mind prefers familiar pain over the unknown possibility of freedom. This isn't unique to one person, and guilt doesn't need to be carried for something installed before consciousness even developed. What's needed now isn't self-punishment, it's self-recognition, seeing where the blockage exists, where voices that aren't original are still being obeyed, where life is still lived in fear of a danger that never existed. But there comes a moment when something breaks, not dramatically, not in a visible collapse. It's an internal click, silent, deep, waking up one day with a realization. This self-opposition can't continue anymore. And that awareness, as painful as it is, marks the beginning of everything. Because until now, the belief held that the problem was external, that changing jobs, cities, relationships would fix everything. But changes were made, and nothing changed. Because the pattern was internal, the saboteur traveled along. Same excuses, same fears, same limitations, just with different scenery. And that's when understanding hit. The external was never the problem. The problem is internal, and always has been. Maybe it was that moment when the chance to speak arose and silence won. That opportunity that appeared, and 1,000 reasons got invented to refuse it. That dream that got killed before it could even be born because the belief said undeserving. And afterward, alone, the weight was felt, not of failure, but of betrayal, because self-betrayal happened. Fear got chosen over courage, and that hurts more than any external defeat. What used to work, hiding, protecting, not risking, now suffocates. The old way of existing no longer serves. Growth happened. The soul grew, but the mind still operates with the same survival mechanisms from a version that doesn't exist anymore. And that's why constant discomfort persists. It's not anxiety without reason. It's essence asking for passage. And unknowingly, the door stays blocked. So let's talk about the invisible. Because everything being felt, everything causing paralysis isn't random. There's a frequency operating, energy circulating. And when internal warfare is active, that energy becomes dense, heavy, contradictory, like an engine trying to go forward and backward simultaneously. Nothing flows. Everything jams. The aura, which is simply the energetic field surrounding the body, responds to thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. When unworthiness is the self-perception, it contracts. When constant self-judgment runs, it weakens. When choices get sabotaged, it emits a confused frequency. And what happens? The surrounding world responds to that frequency, not through magic, but because self-perception determines action, and action determines what gets attracted. When someone becomes their own greatest opponent, two frequencies emit simultaneously, one that desires, another that repels. It's like asking for something while pushing it away. Life doesn't know which energy to answer, so it delivers exactly what the dominant frequency emits: confusion, stagnation, self-sabotage. Not because deserving is absent, but because permission is denied. And here's the point. While internal division persists, the external will mirror it. Relationships will cool. Opportunities will vanish. Money will slip away. Not because the universe is adversarial, but because self-opposition is active. And until this gets aligned, until the self-battle stops, nothing truly changes. Nothing sustains. Because the foundation is the self, and the foundation is cracked. Imagine a fogged mirror. Looking into it reveals nothing clearly, just shadows, distorted shapes. That's how self-perception has been functioning, not through eyes, but through perception. The true self isn't seen. The view comes through lenses taught to be worn, lenses of insufficiency, of fear, of not enough. And naturally everything done appears wrong, because the mirror is dirty, not the person. Now imagine an invisible weight, carried constantly, on the back, on the chest, on the shoulders. But nobody sees it. Nobody understands why exhaustion comes so quickly, why certain things seem impossible while they're simple for others. That weight? It's unresolved beliefs, unprocessed trauma, old versions still occupying mental space. They hold back, pull down, and the fight continues. But while carrying that weight, distance is limited. Think also about silence. Not empty silence, but the silence that emerges when self-conflict stops. when the need to prove, to control, to protect, finally releases. In that silence, truth appears. And truth is simple. Perfection isn't required. Authenticity is. Victory isn't necessary. The self-battle needs to end. Finally, breath. Every time breath gets held unconsciously, it signals resistance. Resisting the moment. Resisting the self. Taking deep, slow, present breaths is the most revolutionary act available now. Because breathing is accepting. It says, presence is here, and everything is okay. And when breathing happens like this, something internal relaxes, and the internal enemy begins to disarm. Now understanding begins to emerge. The problem was never weakness. It was believing in that weakness. The problem was never world rejection. It was self-rejection happening first. Everything lived until now, every retreat, every sabotage, every lost opportunity, wasn't failure. It was protection. Ancient, outdated protection that worked in the past. And the mind repeats what worked. Even when it hurts now, nothing was lost. Recalibration happened. The confusion being felt isn't a sign of being lost. It's a sign of change. And internal change always generates discomfort, because releasing who someone was is required to become who is being born. And that space between the two versions, that's where chaos lives. Doubt, fear, but also transformation. The aura didn't weaken. It became more sensitive. Regression isn't happening. Awakening is. And awakening hurts, because seeing begins. Seeing what was previously ignored, the masks that were worn, the lies that were believed, the patterns that were repeated. And seeing this, without judgment, is already half the journey, because change can't happen without seeing. But when seeing occurs, change has already begun. The internal enemy only holds power while it remains unrecognized. The moment it gets looked at and addressed, I know you're there. I know you just want to protect, but now I'm taking control. Everything shifts, not magically, but really. Blind obedience stops, conscious choice begins, and that's when being held hostage by the self ends, and authorship of one's own story starts. Now take a deep breath, because what's about to be said might shake everything believed until today. Pay attention. The confusion being felt isn't a sign something is wrong. It's a sign something is reorganizing. Nobody is broken. Reconstruction is happening. And reconstruction always passes through chaos before becoming clarity. That silence that causes fear, it's not emptiness. It's space. Space to finally hear the internal voice without the noise of external expectations. That isolation that breeds loneliness, it's not abandonment. It's retreat. A return home. Inward. Where everything begins. Where everything resolves. And this isn't failure. It's wisdom. All this time, the belief held that the self needed to be defeated. But it's not about winning. It's about integration, not about destroying the internal enemy. It's about understanding it only exists because once upon a time, it provided protection. And now, gratitude can be given, and release can happen, because that protection is no longer needed. Readiness exists to trust the self, to allow the self, to occupy the space that was always meant to be filled. The truth is that nobody was ever their own enemy. The programming just made it seem that way. And now, that programming can be rewritten. Not in the future. Now, in this exact moment. Because the person watching isn't the same person who started this video. Something moved. Something awakened. And when this ends, the exit happens different. Not better. More real. More whole. More self. So here's what can be done now. Not tomorrow. Not when readiness feels complete. Now. Because the body needs to feel the shift for the mind to believe it. And this ritual is simple. Takes less than 3 minutes. But when done with presence, it changes the frequency. First, find a place where solitude is possible for a few moments. Could be the bedroom, the bathroom, the car. Location doesn't matter. What matters is that it's a space where performance for others isn't required. Sit or stand. Close the eyes. Place one hand on the chest. Breathe deeply, 3 times. Slowly, feeling air enter and exit. Second, in a low voice or mentally, say this. I recognize I've been fighting against myself, and now I choose alignment. Repeat 3 times. Belief doesn't need to be immediate. Just say it. Because the mind listens, and over time, begins to incorporate. This is the first step, recognizing the internal war, and declaring the desire for peace. Third, whenever self-sabotage is noticed, whenever retreat happens, whenever that diminishing voice is heard, stop, breathe, and ask out loud, is this mine or is this fear? Most times it's fear, and when it gets named, power drains from it, because unnamed fear is tyrannical. Named fear is just fear, and can be seen, and chosen or not. Fourth, before sleep for just 60 seconds review the day, not for judgment, but for observation. How many times did self-sabotage occur? How many times was the self treated as an enemy? And then, mentally, remake those choices. How would action look if the self was treated as an ally? Visualize it, feel it, because the mind doesn't differentiate imagination from reality when emotion is involved. And a new pattern is being trained, one where the self is on its own side. If this point has been reached, something internal moved. And that's not coincidence, not luck. It's recognition. Soul recognizing soul. Truth recognizing truth. This video wasn't watched out of curiosity. It was traversed. And now, on the other side, there's knowing. The battle against the self can end, not when perfection arrives, but when the decision is made that enough already exists. Now, like this, as is. The path isn't about becoming someone better. It's about remembering who was always there before doubt was taught. Nothing needs proving. The world doesn't need conquering. The only requirement is to stop fighting the self. And when that happens, when alignment finally occurs, everything around shifts. Not because the world changed, but because conflict frequency stopped being emitted and presence began. This channel exists for this purpose, to remind what's been forgotten, to return the self to the self. Every video here is a mirror, a passage, a silent rite that only makes sense to those who are ready, and readiness is here. Otherwise, this place wouldn't have been found. So don't ignore this. Don't let this energy dissolve into forgetfulness. If something inside moved, don't ignore it. That's energy remembering who the true self is. Subscribe, hit the bell, and walk with us. Because here, isolation doesn't exist. Here, perfection isn't required. Here, the only requirement is authenticity. And that has always been enough.